Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and I'm a filmmaker and a media consultant based here in Burbank, California, right here in the heart of Hollywood. So I'm always focused on distraction. You know, it's no surprise to you that we live in the most distracted culture in the history of the world, which means there's simply so many options out there, we just can't get over it. I know that when it comes to iPhones, a recent study indicated the typical adult checks their iPhone about 110 times a day. What's horrifying is the average middle school student checks theirs about 85 times a day. And I'll tell you, the distraction is unlimited. You can go on YouTube right now and find multiple videos of people getting hit by cars, people falling into ditches, just because they were so transfixed by their phone. My wife Kathleen and I were filming in Germany last year for a project with the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. And we actually saw a guy fall into a canal because he was so transfixed, so focused on his iPhone. This sorts of distraction has really become incredible. In fact, it's one of the reasons New Jersey is right now, and maybe by the time you see this, they'll have passed this law, but right now they're toying with the idea of outlawing texting and walking. There have been simply so many accidents. I know Hawaii is on track to do the same thing. I mean, think about that. That's how far we've come. In fact, I was in a recent meeting with an advertising agency where I was in a high-rise building, and at the end of the meeting, I went to the elevator. And I saw a sign printed out, and it was taped above the buttons on the elevator. Please make sure the car is in place before the elevator door opens. And I thought it was a joke, so I took a picture and sent it, put it on my Facebook page. And a friend of mine from high school sent me a note and said, no, that's not a joke. She told me that a close friend of hers just a year earlier had been leaving her office, a high-rise office, leaving her office, going to lunch, and she was texting a friend to meet her for lunch. And the door of the elevator opened, she walked in, and there was no car there. And she fell 7 stories to her death. That is the world we live in. That is the world we live in. It's the most distracted world, most distracted culture in the history of the world. In fact, let me read you some interesting statistics that have just come out recently. The Journal of Experimental Psychology, they did a study of 166 people and found out when you're at work and your phone buzzes, your work suddenly gets sloppier whether you answer the phone or not. Just the fact that your phone buzzes is such a distraction that the quality level of your work goes down. The Journal of Computer-Mediated Communication said that when people's phone rang and they couldn't get to it, their problem-solving skills decline, their pulse quickens, and their blood pressure spikes. Think about that just for a minute. Your blood pressure spikes just because your phone rings and you can't get to it. Applied Cognitive Psychology, another journal, studied students, and they found out students that brought their phone into the classroom actually scored a grade level higher than students who didn't have their phone. Think about that for a minute. So what we've discovered is just having phones around is such an incredible distraction, whether we actually use them or not. I mean, that's really, really incredible. And that's why what's happening in New Jersey and Hawaii is so important. I can tell you that some cities in Europe right now are experimenting with padded utility poles. It's such a problem. Distraction. We live in an incredible culture of distraction, which to a big degree is when I think of terms like a culture of hospitality, I always go back to that distraction factor. I think of the short window we have to make an impact in someone's life. I was at a digital summit. I was invited to a real high-level digital summit last year in Hollywood. All the major players were there, Facebook, Crackle, Awesomeness TV, Vice Media, YouTube. They were all there sitting around a table, and we just talked about what's working for you and what's not working for you. And one of the things we discussed was a study that had just come out about a year before on the fact that when you meet somebody today, now remember, we're so distracted, we have so many options, we're pulled in so many directions. The study indicates that when we meet someone for the first time today, we decide what we think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds. Now, really think about that for a minute. We haven't had time to talk to them. We haven't had time to get to know them at all. But we're being so distracted, and we have so many other options to do, and we're thinking about so many things that we've started making decisions about things we don't even know anything about. We decide what we think of people without ever getting to know them. Now, I've studied that because it's really meaningful to me and important to me in a media-centric world that I live in. And I've discovered that it's true for products and experience as well. So this is where hospitality comes into this whole equation. It means that in an 8-second world, I'm glad your pastor's message is anointed. I'm glad your worship is fantastic. But in an 8-second world, what's the parking experience like at your church? In an 8-second world, what does the lobby look like? In an 8-second world, who's the first person a new visitor meets when they walk in the door? Because that could make a huge, huge difference. So what do we do? What in the world do we do in that kind of an 8-second culture? First of all, I believe we create an environment, kind of an 8-second culture, if you will, in the church. Your job is to teach people just how important this is. You need to get your team together. You need to get your church leaders together and talk to them about this world we live in. People are making decisions right away. I know one church in the Midwest that has pinpointed 7 distinct areas from the street to the pew where they can interact and engage with a new visitor and try to impact their experience at the church. They know that people are making decisions from the moment they turn in off the street till they start pulling in the parking lot. They're already making decisions. Sadly, we just live in that world. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying I support it. I'm not saying that I like it. I'm saying it's the world we live in. And I think one of the reasons we as Christians have not made a stronger impact in our culture today is because we're simply behind the 8 ball. We're wishing for a world that doesn't exist anymore. We're wishing for a world when we were actually the dominant mode of thought, when our values were followed by most people. But I wrote a book just this past year called The Way Back, how Christians blew our credibility and how we get it back. And I outlined some incredible research about just how much ground we've lost in the culture. And I think this 8-second rule is probably a big reason for that. It's not just the fact that we're not reading our Bible anymore, that we're not praying anymore, we're not giving anymore, we don't show up to church much, but it's the fact that we're so far behind the culture because we continue to dream about the Christian world that was instead of the actual world that is. So the thought I'd leave you as you're thinking about hospitality, a culture of hospitality, is that we live in an 8-second world. And absolutely focus on every level and area of hospitality you can. Long-term care, long-term relationships, all those things are important. But you know what? In the world we live in today, attention has become the new currency of this generation. Just getting their attention matters. So before you start thinking about your elaborate plans for hospitality, before you start thinking about all the options and all the incredible things people can do at my church and the wonderful experience they'll have, if we can't capture their attention in that first 8 seconds, if we can't pave the way for them to walk in and want a deeper relationship and a deeper experience, you know what? The truth is we've failed. We've completely failed. And I'll say this, the stakes are too high today to fail. We just live in a culture that is not moving in the direction it should be moving. And I can tell you, living in Hollywood, working here in LA, I see it every single day. So as Christians, there's a lot of things we need to do. We need to get serious about our faith. We need to live authentic lives. But we also have to understand technology has dramatically changed the way we live. Just 10 years we've had an iPhone, a little more than 10 years. And that's had a massive impact on our behavior. 8 seconds. The culture of hospitality you live in today is an 8-second world. So I'm Phil Cooke. You can find out more about what I do and how I think at my online blog at philcooke.com. I'm Cooke with an E, Philcooke, philcooke.com. I'd love to see you. I'd love to engage with you there because these kind of issues, technology, faith, culture, media, they're having more of an impact on this culture than you could possibly imagine. Thanks for tuning in. And always remember, it's an 8-second culture. There's a lot of options for people to do out there. We need to focus and make sure we're intentional about how we engage this generation.